Thanks for being here, Rebecca. I'm super excited to chat today. You wrote the book Survive, Reset, Thrive. You've worked with organizations around the world. Tell me, why did you write this book? Why is it important to you now in 2025 more than ever?
Yeah, thanks so much, Anthony, and thank you so much for having me as well. I wrote the book because a couple of things is the number one thing I was seeing was that as leaders and decision makers, we're facing more and more uncertainty. Some would argue we've always been facing uncertainty, but we have a tendency to frame uncertainty as negative or bad, which has pretty big implications for how we incorporate it into our decision making and growth and planning. So I wanted to write this end-to-end playbook that said, hey, no matter what the market condition is, there's growth opportunities in it. And it takes you through this loop of how you stabilize when there's shocks, how you reset because you've got to change, and then how you can go back to thriving on the other end. And the reset is the real power move. I think post COVID, I had a lot of frustration with the don't just survive, thrive mantras. And that kind of misses the entire point that if you're not prepared to reset and change how you're approaching the situation, you won't actually get to that thrive moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, you've been on a lot of podcasts. You're very well known in the, professional world. I've seen it as loops, right? Like
Yes,
not continuously
yes,
building it
yes.
like that. And as CEOs and
Mhm.
senior leaders, you have this interesting juxtaposition of needing to think strategy and long term, managing the day-to-day shocks, and kind
Mhm.
of like having your operational mindset, and then kind of hovering between the two spaces, not
Mhm.
including just going out for a strategy offsite. So, what have you seen work
Mhm.
for leaders as they
Mhm.
have to balance this strategic thinking, operational thinking, not
Mhm.
necessarily in a time of crisis, but as a means of sustaining ongoing?
Yeah, and I'm so glad you asked about not the time in crisis because a lot of leaders, and I'm sure you've heard it, Anthony, will say, well, we're great in crisis. When there's a crisis, we're great. We're super aligned. We can get things done very fast. Like, gosh, I wish there was more crises, right? Because that's when we're at our best. And the whole notion of a growth strategy is take that sentiment, take that alignment, take that urgency, and apply it without the exhaustion to growing your business. And a big part of that is moving from what I call linear thinking to loop thinking, which sounds a bit theoretical. So let's make it practical, right? Is we love checklist. We love being done with stuff. And the challenge and more so the opportunity of a growth strategy is you're never done. You're always doing these continually strategy cycles or strategy loops. And so if you embrace this notion that we're in a loop, right? And then I'm always got these intersection loops going forward, you actually set yourself up for a lot more opportunities. And where that practically happens is when your organization is thriving, and most people have been there at least for a bit, you don't want to go back to survive. You want to almost ignore the shocks. And if you embrace this notion of the loop, you think, well, actually, a bit of shock is normal, right? It happens, right? And I'm going to go back there and then go back along the line. But everything in breakthrough growth is a loop, not a line. We got to abandon the comfort of checklists and move to the notion of this loop thinking, which means shifting from planning to preparing. Is I'm going so far as to say, I think we should stop using the term strategic plan. And I don't usually get overly hung up on language, but here's what I found, Anthony, is that when we use the term plan, we frame our brain, everything in this must get done. And that's not a frame we should have on the strategy. Strategy are living, breathing documents that should adjust as we learn and as we execute. So let's just call them strategies and stop the word strategic plan because I want you from day one with your team going to say, this thing is going to change as we learn. The worst thing you can do if you really want to piss me off, which isn't a suggestion I make, is if I ask you how things are going, just say, hey, Rebecca, things are great. We're heads down execution mode. And I always say, well, what the hell are you doing there? Right? Get heads up into learning mode and embrace this change because that's where the real power of growth comes from.
Hmm. Well, I obviously, as a company that facilitates strategic planning session or
Yes.
strategy sessions,
Mhm.
and there's certain folks who have built the muscle, like they have strong strategy execution
Yeah.
or strong
Hmm.
strategic thinking. They're looking iteratively, they're using it as an ongoing document, and they're building the capacity for strategy execution. And there's folks who never do it and
Hmm.
they keep managing forward. So it's interesting to hear that,
Yeah.
when we say, hey, into strategies, it's
Hmm.
about making those choices. So the
About
loop
making
of
choices.
continuously making the right choices.
Hmm.
What I'm interested about hearing and kind of take this in a couple directions. One is, from the companies you've worked with, one of the ones is like WD-40, a
Yes.
product that,
Yes.
as you look at it, is consistent, but has to evolve and change. The
Yeah.
other is going through that uncertainty
Mhm.
when you are forced to change. How do you adapt it? So, how do you kind of merge those consistent product, consistent system, iterative to being in chaos and then having to kind of scramble and find something new?
Yeah, well, the best place to be in survive mode is proactive survive, right? Is you're always set the organization up to survive. And the words even like recession proofing or recession planning, I just ban the R word is what I say, right? Because great survive is proactive survive. You're always setting your organization up to survive pre-crisis, pre-shock, pre-chaos, which I know is hard to believe right now. And early 2025, there is a world without shock and chaos. Is we kind of set what I call these basics, like where do we need to be at all times as an organization? And if you set yourself up that way, when there's shocks to the system, you've already done the hard work of establishing the boundaries, of knowing what it's going to take. So you have this brief pause and then you are resetting and going back to thrive again. So don't wait for the shock. Be proactive. Now, that doesn't mean running too lean. You're still deploying cash to the areas that need them, but great survive is proactive survive. And what you're touching on without the words is a really big topic right now. It's a passionate topic of mine. And that's that notion of how do you just continually thrive or build what we call in strategy world competitive advantage or a right to win, right? And what a lot of companies do, Anthony, is they build this competitive advantage and then they get comfortable because they do have a right to win. And the world changes around them. And what's happening is what used to be advantage for 10, 15 years became advantage for 6, 9 years is you can have a right to win to roads in 3. And we're seeing that in the world of AI right now as well. And for people who think, well, I'm not an AI company, there's some really powerful lessons happening on in that world that can apply to any small business. And where companies like WD-40 set themselves ahead is they're looking 2 to 3 strategy cycles out on their top trends and beliefs. Like, what are our big beliefs about where the industry is going? And as a pause, this is what sets high-performing companies apart, is they take decisions based on beliefs, not waiting for facts. And so these high-performing teams are articulating their beliefs, they're taking actions based on their beliefs, but they're also watching and testing. Because when you're making decisions based on beliefs, not waiting for facts, you're going to get a couple things wrong, which is okay. So I want you to think about it like parallel pathing. So they're testing their beliefs in the market while they're executing. They're taking that feedback in from the testing of the beliefs and updating them into their strategy or strategic plans. So it's this notion of the punchline here is acting on beliefs, not waiting for facts, but building a capability of adaptability because we're going to change some things as we learn more about our beliefs.
Yeah, absolutely. And being able to solicit those beliefs from teams, because that's why you
Yeah.
have a diverse leadership team to be able to have different perspectives. When we do strategic planning, and
Mhm.
not to plug us, but I think that
Yeah.
we do a good job, is
Mhm.
we look at trends, we have everybody
Mhm.
see what do you think the future is,
Yeah.
and do scenario planning for saying, hey, what are the extremes? How do
Mhm.
we live within those? One of
Yeah.
the terms that came to mind when you were talking about the
Yeah.
multiple strategy cycles and the
Mhm.
competitive advantage is the idea of like an economic moat. Like, yes,
Yes.
there's for profit, yes, there's nonprofit,
Mhm.
but like, how do you create that
Yes.
long-term sustainable advantage, competitive advantage, and the gaps or the pressure
Yeah.
on those moats are getting faster and faster and more painful and painful. And so now those that don't have a sufficient moat or don't have sufficient long enough
Mhm.
strategy cycles are now having to react in a major way. We're also talking like in the news, we said, hey, well, let's not get political,
Yeah.
but there have been economic systems that have been set
Yeah.
up for decades, and in some cases, multiple years, where
Mhm.
people are thinking that this is the case. Now it sounds like there's major significant tidal shifts in terms
Mhm.
of global economic forces and that kind of stuff. So, looking ahead at your
Yeah.
beliefs,
Yeah.
without quoting you,
Mhm.
what are some of the beliefs that you see for 2025, 2026, and beyond? You talked about AI as one. Any other
Yeah.
ones that you think will be
Yeah,
pervasive that
well,
are?
let's touch on this notion of moats first, and then let's go to the more macro trends for listeners who might be thinking about them. Is it used to be, and I kind of like we're talking like old people here pontificating around a fire, but in the old days, you could re-examine your right to win every couple of years, and that was sufficient, right? Now, once a year or less is almost lazy to do it that infrequently because that is how quickly these things are eroding. So if you think about, let's summarize it, competitive advantage taught in MBA schools over 6 months. No one has time for that. I like to say there's only three ways to build a right to win. You've got stuff others don't, you can do stuff others can't, or you can build moats around your advantage. Here's the challenge. Capital, when it's free flowing, and AI and digital technology quickly erode having stuff others don't. It's getting easier to do stuff others can't. The power in all of this is these moats, this loyalty you build around your customers. For companies like WD-40 or consumer goods, we call it irrational loyalty. You have such a strong value proposition. Your customers, and not just consumers, are irrationally loyal to you. And I challenge all companies to really examine that because there's a power in your moats. And I've never seen, Anthony, a strategic topic change as much as moats has in the last 18 months,
Mm.
from the time frame we examine it to what it takes to build it. And that's something I'm really exploring. And then we have what I call the trifecta right now of tariffs, taxes, and tensions. And it's the intersection of this trifecta that really starts to move with strategic planning. But what I encourage folks to do, and I've already done this 3 times today with different teams, is the knee-jerk reaction is to go from a trend to an implication. There's going to be tariff in US to Canada. We must stockpile inventory. There's going to be a change in tax. We must change our pricing. And we pride ourselves on being entrepreneurial because we're reacting. That's knee jerk. The real power of strategy is going trend to belief to implication. We are seeing X and we believe Y, which means Z for us. And that belief becomes that powerful alignment mode for your team, which then you make your choices on. And the reason this is critical is a lot of trends are moving very quickly. A, but B, the belief almost is this pause to help us know what to test, because we're going to get feedback on whether or not our belief is proving out way before we get feedback on if our strategic priorities are proving out. So the challenge in all of these trends is don't just react with a quick implication. I'm seeing X and I believe Y, which means Z for us. And I do believe a lot of the tariffs are power plays. They're negotiating tactics. Will we see some? Yes. To a level of severity we're talking about? No. Should companies start rethinking strategy about where production distribution is? Yes. Should you blow up your entire global supply chain? Absolutely not. What people can think about is what I call kickers and killers. So if you take these trends, and you just mentioned scenario planning to the extreme, really force your team to think, what are the real killers? Like if this trend goes to the extreme, it would break the business model. But here's the thing, Anthony, you know what we're not very good at is the kickers. Like if this trend went to the extreme, what are those big upside growth opportunities? When I ask teams to brainstorm kickers and killers, and try this, you'll see it, right? 5 minutes, they can give you 20 killers, an hour to give you 5 kickers, right? And so this is part of this growth mindset. All trends have an opportunity in them. Part of our job, right, is to help leaders reframe from seeing every trend as a threat to protect against to a set of growth opportunities.
Yeah, first of all, I love it. First of all, love the quotables, like no
Yeah.
shortage once you should write a book. The
Mhm.
kickers and killers looking at the upside,
Yeah.
again, back in the old days when you did like a
Yeah.
SWOT analysis, there's a
Yeah.
reason that there's opportunities and weaknesses and they
Yes.
have the same size box.
Yeah.
What I find fascinating, both in terms of the internal, like the loyalty
Mhm.
piece, if you look at
Yeah.
Apple, whether you like them as a company, they built a tremendous ecosystem
Yeah.
to sustain their moat and make it really hard
Mhm.
to leave so that you
Yeah.
have the fanatics that stay with you,
Mhm.
being able to bring everything in house, uh, and just the ecosystem in terms of everything that's going on around.
Yeah.
Some organizations unsuccessfully think of themselves just as this. Now,
Mhm.
because of those macro
Yeah.
interconnections, you're subject to a lot of things. So, how does how does a senior leader, let's call it a CEO,
Yeah.
develop the talent within
Mhm.
their organization?
Yeah.
Because we all know that there's A players. We know that there's,
Yes.
let's call it B players.
Mhm.
And there's some folks that, couldn't do an economic
Yeah.
analysis to get themselves out of a paper bag.
Yeah.
How does a CEO build the right
Mhm.
team, recognizing that it takes months
Yeah.
and years to transform that
Mhm.
internally to be able to think of those growth opportunities, to think
Yeah.
of how to thrive, not just the killers? And we'll end on that today.
Yeah. Love the question. You got to break the tension of urgency and patience because you've got to have both at the same time. You've got to have the urgency of knowing how quickly the world is moving and not delay on decisions about the team that you know that you need to make. but you've also got to have patience for the capability building. Now, if you want to go to the extreme, there is an extreme way to look at it, is that when you examine your talent, I like to split it into two, like actually be pretty binary. One type of talent is what I call kind of a tour of duty, right? And Reid Hoffman has some similar terminology, the founder of LinkedIn, as in we need to do something very specific and we need the best person for that job. And once this is done, we won't need that individual anymore. An ERP implementation, maybe setting up a key account program, hire the best individual for that job, right? And know that it's going to be a tour of duty or hire for what I call repurposability, which isn't a Webster's dictionary term, but I've used it enough. Maybe we'll get it there. As in this individual, I can repurpose as we repurpose. If I really take the belief that my business model might morph and change over the next couple of years, let's hire individuals who can do that as well. We often make compromises on both of those aspects because we don't use that lens. But if you just think, okay, I've got some tours of duty, I've got some repurposability, then we actually stop making compromises. We hire less people, right? Because less fit into that. But then I've actually built that robustness. And then more simple, but actually harder is you've got to commit to it. Growth is a commitment. It is not a given. It is very easy to stand up in front of the team and talk about your broad ambitions. And then it's not just about getting it done. Building a growth strategy is in parallel building a growth capability with your team. And as a CEO, you've got to make that explicit commitment and be prepared to show up every day to build capability, not just get it done in the market.
Okay. So it seems easy enough, right? It sounds
Yeah.
like our senior leaders have some homework, other
Yes.
than picking up your book and, of course, like reading some of the stuff that you do. What is
Mhm.
a call to action that you'd have our senior leaders if they were to spend 30 minutes, an hour, half a day on really thinking about all the gamut of things that
Mhm.
you've shared today? Where would you have them start?
Embrace the loop mentality, kind of figure out where you are in the survive, reset, thrive loop. Be prepared to move through the loop. Articulate your beliefs, be prepared to test them, and then commit to it. If you're going to commit to it, you can build the team around it.
Awesome. Rebecca Homkes, thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's been such a blast. And I look forward to checking out your book and just learning more and seeing how these beliefs play out in the next couple of years and months here.
Absolutely. Anthony, it was my pleasure. Love to chat again.
Folks, my guest today, Rebecca Humkus, the author of Survive, Reset, Thrive. So many things to consider. It is timeless wisdom. What I think is interesting is just a matter of where you are in that loop that will shift where you're at. I'm kind of thinking about it as like a Hot Wheels track, that if you're in the right place, you'll either pick up or you'll need to kind of invest into picking up some speed. Regardless, you need to have conversations with your team to build on these capacities and these skills ongoingly. So connect with Rebecca online, learn more about her work, have not a strategic planning session, but a strategy session with your team, and we'd be happy to facilitate that as well. So thanks for being here on the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. My name is Anthony Taylor. Rebecca, thank you again for joining us today, and we'll catch everybody next time. Bye for now.
Thank you, Anthony.